COVID. Our board strongly encourages in the families to celebrate with household members only, to avoid large gatherings, to actually use technology if possible to connect electronically, whether that's by telephone, Facebook, Zoom, whatever you have, but keep your household isolated. Don't bring multiple households together if you can all avoid it. If you are coming together, if you have children that are coming back, we want to implement a strategy that minimizes risk and optimizes safety. And we provide very specific recommendations for how to do that. Sandra, if you can go back one slide. First, by this weekend, Saturday, have a conversation with all participants that are going to be coming together over the holiday period and have agreement about how you're going to manage the COVID-19 risk. Second, for Thanksgiving, starting this weekend, Saturday, eliminate unnecessary exposures by restricting activities such as travel, shopping, dining out, bars, social gatherings that you are not in control of others that may be providing you risk. Third, prior to travel and by Monday of Thanksgiving week, seek a COVID-19 PCR molecular test. Get everyone tested because we know this virus can be infected in an individual, but they can be asymptomatic in up to 50% of the people. And you don't want someone unintentionally coming to infect your family. On Thanksgiving, we have a plan and 10 things for you to execute to reduce risk. So if we can go back to that timeline, let me just share it. This Saturday, discuss with every one of your family units how you want to manage the risk. And if you don't agree, consider not participating. Start restricting unnecessary activities so that you minimize your exposure. Prior to travel, if you're traveling at the end of next week, get a COVID-19 test. If you're not traveling and you're in your environment on Monday of Thanksgiving week, get a COVID-19 test. And then on Thanksgiving, have a plan to execute the following 10 easy steps to help reduce risk. So let's go to those steps. First, limit your group to 10 or fewer if possible. We know the larger number of people increases the chance that somebody could bring COVID into your environment. Anyone with cold-like symptoms, fever, headache, cough, and particularly loss of taste or smell should not attend. They could have COVID. For individuals that have those chronic conditions that we talked about, diabetes, kidney failure, COPD, asthma, congestive heart failure, we have a full list that leads to increased hospitalizations and increased likelihoods of death. Safeguard those individuals. Do not bring home individuals from the nursing home for the day because of the potential for exposure. One of the most important things, if weather permits, and I'm hopeful that the good weather that we've been having will hold, consider eating outside. Ventilation is a critically important component here, and unlike our places of business that have a pretty good turnover of air, our homes have been sealed for energy efficiency, and we don't get much turnover of air when the windows are closed. So if you have to go indoors, open the windows. Even if you have to turn on the heat, turn on your vent hood on the range so that you are sucking air in through the windows and out through the ventilator mechanism to try to dilute the virus if it does come home. Don't share serving utensils. Have an individual assigned to wear a mask and to serve everyone so that you're not transferring potential virus by having folks go down the line, as is so true in many of our family events at Thanksgiving and other times. Limit the length of time for the event. Have it be a shorter event, not an all-day event that increases your exposure. Maintain as much distance as possible. Wear masks, even if it's your loved ones, your cousins. What's happening, I think, is we are letting our guard down around our friends, around our family, and it's not intentional that they're bringing the COVID-19 virus in, but this tricky little virus is infecting us, and we are infected 4 to 5 days before we have symptoms. And as many as half of us don't have symptoms, and we can bring that virus in. Obviously, sanitize and wash hands frequently. And if you're having out-of-town guests that have already gone through the risk reduction strategy that we talked about and gotten a PCR test that you know is negative, maximize your outdoor time, maintain social distance, and wear masks throughout the visit when not eating or drinking. These are the 10 things to have on Thanksgiving. I reiterate, have a conversation this weekend, start your risk reduction strategy if you're going to come together, get a test, and do these 10 things. but really strongly think about whether you can do Thanksgiving different and just stay in your own individual household units and come together in an electronic way. Let me move and share with you why I am so concerned about this. These are the number of new cases per day. And while we haven't heard yet today's cases, we had over 1,900 new cases. And you see just in the last 5 weeks how much this has stepped up. The number of cases on Mondays and Tuesdays is always lower because the number of tests we do on Saturdays and Sundays when the clinics are closed is not as great. I fear that we're going to top 2,000 soon within the next several days. When we look at these cases, they turn into real risk, and this is statewide. We track the risk by our trauma systems. We organize the trauma system for smaller hospitals to refer to larger hospitals. And these are the number of new active cases per 1,000 residents in each of our trauma systems. 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, it was 1 or 2 per 1,000 residents. Now we're at 4 to 6. And on the next slide, you can see the direction that each trauma system is moving. We're all going in the wrong direction with rapid spread among our rural communities. And it is our rural communities that are bearing this brunt. On the next slide, we have the zip codes that have the new known infections in the last 14 days. Any of the darkest zip codes here have 100 or more new infections, or more than 1% of the population infected in those zip codes. And some of our zip codes, it's up to almost 3% of the residents of that zip code have been newly affected in the last 14 days. And you can see, while the numbers reported by the Governor and Secretary Romero are frequently Pulaski County, the northwestern part of the state, Pine Bluff, Jonesboro, the exposure rate is across the state and many of our rural counties that historically have not been as worried about coming in contact with COVID-19. We're also looking at school districts. And over the last 2 weeks, this is the red zone school district map for the middle of October, October the 12th. Today we released the following red zone district map, and we've had a dramatic reduction in green school districts and enhancement in red school districts. We have gone from 54 green school districts at the 1st of October to now only 15. We've gone from 13 red school districts at the beginning of October to now 48 that are either red or in the most extreme concentration purple. These are infections in the community that place the schools at risk, from which students come from, school personnel comes from. So under both our hospital scenario and our school scenario, the risk is becoming broad, widespread, and it represents a real threat as we come together for Thanksgiving. So let me go to the next slide. This is a CDC case study that shows how important this is. This is a family reunion that happened back in August. There were 20 relatives that came together, including a teenager who had been exposed, had not yet developed COVID, but had been exposed. Of the 14 relatives that came together and shared a house for the weekend, they didn't stay 6 feet apart, they didn't wear masks. The teenager plus 11 relatives came down with COVID-19, so 11 out of 14. Of 6 relatives who visited but stayed outside, stayed 6 feet apart, wore masks, none of those 6 came down with COVID-19. And we're increasingly learning that COVID-19 is not just mild symptoms, but for those that have serious illness, we know that in about 30% it affects the function of your heart. We now know that in about 5% it can cause memory loss and the emergence of mental illness. And we know that for far too many, this ends up being a long-standing impact that negates any benefit of coming together on Thanksgiving. So with that, let me come back. I want everyone to enjoy a safe Thanksgiving, to have a COVID-free Thanksgiving. We need to lean in together. We are in for a long haul. We do have light at the end of the tunnel in some of the new information coming out about vaccines. But for the general population in Arkansas and communities, that safety is several months away. And we have the holidays coming up. We know what works. Masks work. This is a respiratory virus. Social distance works. Gravity works on those respiratory particles. And hand washing works. And we need to bring that knowledge into how we treat each other at these holiday seasons. And we offer this guidance for support to help stimulate conversation and not to take away Thanksgiving, but to have Thanksgiving be a COVID-free Thanksgiving that has everyone healthy and doing well as we go into the Christmas holiday season. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be glad to take questions. I wish I had better news of where we were, but I think reality rules, and we've got to recognize the risks that are in our community statewide. Thank you for joining us.
Great. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will unmute you, or you can leave them in the chat box. We will also send a recording. I know a couple of you had asked